October 3rd, 1986. The Atlantic is a flat sheet of gray, the kind of morning that makes distance look like a rumor. Hundreds of miles east of Bermuda, a long black shape moves beneath the skin of the sea. A Soviet Yankee-class ballistic missile submarine, hull number K-219, 34,000 tons of steel, 2 nuclear reactors turning twin shafts, 16 missile tubes standing like organ pipes behind the sail. Inside, the air smells of oil, paint, hot wiring, and men. A patrol should feel boring. Boredom means the reactor hum stays steady, the navigation plot crawls like a slow heartbeat, and the watch officer's coffee tastes like coins and not like emergency. K-219's patrol has been routine. The crew knows the rhythm, drills, maintenance, quiet meals, folded bunks, the stubborn seam of sleep. Above them, the Cold War breathes in headlines and speeches. Down here, it breathes in valves and checklists. In the missile compartment, sailors work in a corridor barely wider than their shoulders. Each tube is a world of seals, bolts, and pressure. Tube 6, the one that will write itself into every memory, has been troublesome before. Seawater has a way of finding ambition in gaskets that are a little tired. Salt loves to meet the wrong chemicals. A few minutes after sunrise, the watch notes something that is not drama yet. A trace on a gauge that doesn't sit exactly where it should. A film of moisture where there should be none. A rhythm in the pumps that suggests they're thinking too hard. Routine sends a man with a wrench and a rag, and the kind of patience that keeps submarines alive. Seawater is patient too. A thin leak becomes a line becomes a path becomes a handshake, with the only thing on this submarine more dangerous than the ocean, missile fuel. In the dark belly of Tube 6, oxidizer meets salt. What should be inert becomes curious. Curiosity becomes heat. The first sound is not a bang. It's a cough inside metal, a muffled thump like a fist in another room. Then the world convulses. The deck underfoot heaves. A pressure wave punches through the corridor. The missile tube cap lifts against its will and slams back down crooked. Paint dust falls like gray snow. Lights blink, hold, and then return to their duty as if ashamed for having flinched. Men are on their feet before their ears have finished ringing. They know the difference between a drill and physics. Alarms speak in 2 languages at once. A mechanical scream and the well-trained voices of sailors calling out the names of compartments and the words that matter. Fire, breach, flooding. Captain Igor Bretanov, broad shoulders, eyes that look at problems the way a welder looks at metal, moves through the boat in strides that have learned to be fast without making panic contagious. He has done the war games. He has read the memos that never leave safe drawers. He knows that a missile tube on a nuclear boat is not allowed to be interesting. Tube 6 is suddenly very interesting. He orders the boat to surface. There is no heroism in staying under now, only stupidity. If things go badly, the ocean will need a path out of the hull that doesn't travel through the crew. Ballast tanks roar. K-219 rises, steel shuddering, and breaks the skin of the Atlantic in a boil of foam. On deck, the missile tube hatch plate is cocked like a broken tooth. A brown chemical smoke threads into the wind. The sky takes the color and makes it look harmless. It is not. Inside, the missile compartment is a confusion of heat, vapor, and the sharp taste of something you never wanted to taste. Sailors pull on masks with practiced hands. Fire teams move in, low, calm as men can be when the deck under their knees is thinking about hatred. It isn't a single flame now. It's a chain reaction learning to climb. On the control panel, red bulbs that have never dared light together decide to become a constellation. The boat's brain does what it is supposed to do: isolate, seal, deny oxygen. The boat's body fights back with noises that suggest the sea still wants to meet the inside of the hull. Valves spin. Doors slam. A petty officer slaps the back of a new seaman's glove without looking and points to the proper wrench. This is what experience is. Knowing where to point before your mouth knows the sentence. The Radio Shack reaches out to the sky with words that are not taught in parades. Casualty, fire, explosion, surfacing. The Atlantic gives the message to the ether, and the ether gives it to a chain of ears that used to sleep well. Somewhere in Moscow, a machine will print a strip of paper that turns this morning into policy. Somewhere in Washington, a satellite will take a picture of a dot in a large rectangle, and someone will label the dot with a name that is sometimes wrong. It doesn't matter. Down here, names are for men, problems are for hands. The first miracle is small. The crew stops the open flame. The second miracle is smaller and more important. They prevent it from being replaced by something worse. Smoke hangs in layers like unrolled blankets. Filters work until they don't. Then men become filters. Breathing becomes a chore you do for your shipmates rather than yourself. In the reactor compartment, lights stay steady until they don't. Alarms don't scream here. They accuse in steady tones because this room is built to distrust drama. K219 carries 2 pressurized water reactors. They are disciplined, hard to insult, and unforgiving when finally insulted. Cooling systems hum like monks. If they keep humming, no one will ever write a book. If they hesitate, history will find you. The shock from the tube explosion has changed more than air. Electrical buses hiccup, a pump stutters. In the mess of isolations and reroutes, the reactor trips towards scram, control rods dropping, fission calming, the machine that is the heart learning how to be quiet fast. A quiet reactor is safe, but it is also dead weight in a storm. A quiet reactor, mishandled, can become a hot rock with nowhere for its heat to walk. Britanoff has 2 orders to juggle: save the men, save the ship. Do not turn a bad day into a chapter with black-bordered pages. He orders ventilation carefully, enough to give men lungs, not enough to give the fire a voice. He orders the missile compartment sealed to let it consider its sins alone. He orders damage control by habit and by instinct, the way you order a meal when you cannot imagine being hungry. A sailor stumbles out of the missile bay, helmet slightly askew, eyes like an animal that has learned a new word for pain. Someone removes his mask and gives him another. Someone else marks a tally on a pad that is already smudged. The count is the count. The names can come later. While officers speak in clipped phrases, the Atlantic begins to change color, as if distance could express opinion. A Soviet submarine on the surface alarms more than weather. Somewhere far below K219, an American attack boat may be listening, recording, deciding whether to move closer or hold the same shadow 3 lengths behind. What matters on this deck is not that. What matters is that Tube 6 has bitten and the bite is not clean. Heat climbs. Pressures argue. In the compartment where the 2 reactors live behind their steel and lead, the temperature nudges gauges that prefer to be uninteresting. A junior engineer swallows hard and pretends it's just coffee. The senior engineer knows better. He looks at a panel that tells him 3 truths at once. The reactor has scrammed. Residual heat is real. And the circuitry that should feed the pumps is less trustworthy now than it was 15 minutes ago. The worst case is a word no one wants to say. You do not melt in water. You die in it a different way. Hydrogen, pressure, chemical tantrums. You do not say the sentence. You erase it with work. Captain Britanoff orders a tow. Save the men. Save the hull. Get help. The Atlantic gives him a merchant ship sooner than anyone had a right to expect. The American Coast Guard asks questions in a courteous tone from the edge of a line both sides understand without paint. A Soviet rescue vessel turns its bows toward a point on a map that will be the name of a story soon. And down in the plant, a decision begins to grow bones. You can keep a scrammed reactor honest with pumps and electricity, or you can keep it honest with gravity and courage. The remote systems are arguing with circuits that distrust the day. The safe way, the way you practice and hate, is manual insertion. You put the rods where they belong by hand, with the boat open to the Atlantic and the decks confused and the men already tired. You do it fast and correct the first time. You do it in a compartment that would prefer to be unoccupied. You do it knowing the only thing between you and a temperature that means goodbye is a flooding door that wants to jam and a latch that has learned to be stubborn. A name steps forward. Seaman Sergei Preminin, 20 years old. Quiet, the way men are quiet when their jokes are for after, not for now. He's done this in drills, sweating, because he was supposed to, not because Heat had a personal opinion. Now the Heat has decided it cares. He doesn't announce himself. He doesn't need to. The engineer of the watch looks at the panel, and then at the young man, and then at the panel again, and says the thin sentence that counts, "We go in." The way to the manual controls is a corridor that would be claustrophobic even without the taste of metal in the air. The hatch is heavy with intent. Beyond it, a room whose sound is fans, pumps, and the relentless shrug of the Atlantic trying to argue with welds. The plan is simple. Get in, get the rods down, get out, let the machine cool. Live to remember how ordinary the taste of tea can be when you have kept a reactor boring. On deck, the tow line moves toward possibility. The sea rolls without malice. On the bridge, Britanov signs his name in the air, with decisions no one else will ever truly understand. In the missile bay, men count their breaths like coins. In the mess, someone cleans cups because hands want work when the mind has too much. All of that recedes from the center, because now the center is a round wheel, a slot, a pair of manual drives, and a young man's arms. Preminin strips down to his work shirt. He wipes his palm on his trousers. The fabric is already damp with air that has forgotten it is supposed to be kind to skin. He looks once at the man beside him, another seaman, older by 3 paydays, who will act as second and says nothing. Talking steals air. Agreement can live in eyes. They open the hatch. A bite of hot, wrong air steps into their faces. The two step through anyway. The latch snicks behind them like a clock choosing a different minute. In the control room, the engineer watches the indicators that know whether rods are where smart men in other cities decided they should be. He waits for movement that will mean the choice was not just brave, but correct. He waits for needles to travel toward good news. Preminin puts his hands on metal that doesn't want to be touched. He learns how much leverage lives in his shoulders. He turns. The wheel fights, then yields, then fights again. He hears his own breath inside the mask, and it sounds like someone else's. He speaks the counts aloud so the other man can carry them, and the other man repeats them, and the wall carries them back as if walls could keep score. Outside the hatch, men listen to a noise only engineers love, the small change in tone when a machine says thank you by becoming less interesting. A gauge nods, another nods. One holds, then, reluctantly, the way the stubborn agree, joins the vote. The reactor is becoming what you want a reactor to be after a bad day, heavy with rods, quiet with geometry. Halfway through the sequence, something simple decides to be a problem. Heat and pressure do what they always do to seals. They argue them out of their convictions. The air becomes thinner. The mask that made the room legal begins to lie. Preminin and his partner don't waste time listing options. They've run out of more polite verbs. There are 2 rods left to force home. Between those rods and a quieted core are 2 minutes that will be the longest any man on K219 has suffered through. Preminin chooses the wheel again. Fingers are thick now. Forearms are shaking with lactic truth. He thinks a small, precise thought. Finish. The other seaman braces the assembly with his shoulder and pushes his own breath deeper, as if there were a pantry for oxygen inside his chest and he could shop there by will. The engineer in the control room watches the panel. A small dot travels. When it arrives, the safest number in the world will appear. Inserted. He has never loved a verb more. On the bridge, the captain glances at the horizon, and then at the men around him, and then at the sealed door that stands between him and the boy, whose name will someday be taught to strangers in schools that have never smelled metal. He does not pray aloud. He makes the shape of a prayer with the way he refuses to blink. Below, Sergei Preminin puts the last of his weight into the wheel and feels the metal's mind change. It is as if the reactor itself decides to be sensible. The resistance becomes agreement. The indicator travels. The other seaman shouts it. Before he knows he's shouting, the engineer upstairs sees the needle arrive and says, "We have insertion," in a voice that will be the most beautiful thing anyone hears for a year. The work is not done. They must get out. The hatch that was heavy before is heavier now because the room behind it has opinions about pressure. The mechanism groans. The latch argues. The older seaman pulls with all the technique of a man who has moved safes with his hands. It moves enough to make hope reasonable. It stops. Sweat runs into eyes and burns. Fingers slip. A curse might help, but air costs more than swear words are worth. Preminen gestures. You go. It is not gallantry. It is arithmetic. One will fit through that opening if he turns his shoulder the exact right way. The other will not. The older seaman hesitates for the time it takes a heart to hammer twice. Preminen makes the gesture again and adds a word that is global in any language. Now. The man squeezes through. He falls into a world with more air and more hands. He turns back. He is already reaching. He and the men at the hatch grab for Premenen's arms. The gap is not kind. The metal has chosen to be small today. Preminen, muscles spent, lungs bargaining, tries one more turn of the wheel to gain an inch. It gives him half. They pull. He pushes. The boat moves easily through water. The hatch does not move easily through stubbornness. The weight of the ocean and the weight of a day's decisions gather at the lip of that round opening. The man outside says the sentence he will regret. Hold on. Preminen does. He holds on to the edge and to the fact that he has finished the job. Behind him, in the room that does not love people, the heat continues to think. In front of him, in the corridor that loves people in the only way steel can, by offering them a path, men argue with a circle of metal and physics argue back. And that is where we pause, with the reactor quiet, with the boat alive, with a hero between worlds, and with the Atlantic stretching in every direction like a face that refuses to tell you what it is thinking. In the next hour, K219 will discover how much damage a morning can carry and how much courage fits in a human chest. He holds on. He holds the rim with both hands, knuckles white inside a world that has turned the color of iron. The corridor beyond is full of men, voices trying not to be voices, hands trying to become levers. His chest tries to climb out through his throat. The air that reaches him has to learn a new shape to fit. The hatch is a circle of stubborn math. It is almost enough. Almost is the cruelest measurement a sailor ever meets. He does not brag. He does not pray aloud. He counts his breaths because that is the only arithmetic left. He has placed the rods where they belong. The panel upstairs has agreed. The reactor is quieting like a drum with a palm over it. The boat is safer than it was 10 minutes ago because he decided to do a job the hard way and do it to the end. The men outside the hatch do not stop trying. A pipe wrench appears from a hand you can't see. A shoulder wedges into metal. A curse is bitten into a sleeve. The gap refuses to widen. Pressure has chosen its side. Metal, once a servant, has become a referee. Back, he mouths, because he can't make his throat spend air on consonants anymore. You did it, someone says, because he can't bear the idea that the last thing the boy hears is grunting. His fingers leave the rim. He is not falling. He is letting go. There is a difference, and he owns the difference. The door slides that last mean half-inch back into its seat. The latch catches. The corridor regains its air. The reactor keeps its quiet. The ship keeps its life. The man who has just crawled out to safety collapses against the bulkhead and rips his mask off, his breath a series of ugly animals. Men stand, unable to stand. The engineer looks down at his panel and up at the hatch and feels the worst mixture a human being can experience. Relief married to loss. He puts one hand on the metal and keeps it there for a count of 5. It's not a salute. It's a promise. We will say your name when the air is kind again. They say his name. They say it in whispers first because grief is a shy thing at a crisis. And then they say it clearly because the boat allows it time. Sergei Primonin, 20 years old. He walked into heat and stubborn physics and made a machine obey. He closed the circle so others could open theirs. The rest of the boat begins to discover what survival sounds like. Pumps find their voices. Fans hold their notes. The missile compartment stays sullen and closed. Smoke thins, then wanders, then chooses to quit the conversation. Men peel off masks and look like newborns, red-faced and damp and stunned to still exist. On the bridge, Captain Britanoff does the calculus any captain does when the ocean has written a new line of conditions. What do I have? What can I trust? How far is help? What must be carried to the next minute, and what can be thrown off the deck into history? Help is not far if you draw a straight line on a map. Help is far if you measure it in weather, politics, and the fact that your ship is a moving embassy full of secrets that rust, burn, and sink like everything else. He raises the radio. His voice is the kind of steady you only get on the day you needed to be it. He speaks to the fleet. He speaks to merchant ships. He speaks to anyone with a deck and a rope. Meanwhile, planes are already interested. Satellites have been interested since dawn. A merchant hull appears as a smudge first, then as a shape with cranes and rust streaks. The sort of ship whose entire vocation is kindness to things that cannot cross water by themselves. Lines are passed. Lines hold. K219 rides the swell like a wounded animal trying not to show limp. The tow takes, not perfectly, but good enough, to add one more thread to the rope that holds life to life. Inside, the crew sorts themselves into those who can rest and those who cannot. Damage control does not sleep. The plant does not forgive naps. The watch bill moves like an abacus rebuilt during an earthquake. In the mess, a kettle finds a burner and insists on making hot water because men need cups in their hands right now more than they need explanations. News arrives in fragments, as it does when a story is still deciding on its verbs. There are rumors about how all this started. Some say a collision, some say a leak, some say fate had a sip of seawater and learned to like it. Sources will differ, and they will differ forever because the ocean doesn't write footnotes. What is certain is this: a missile tube tore the morning open, a crew closed it, and a boy made a reactor listen. The list of dead solidifies the way ink dries, too fast once it begins. 3 from the blast, 1 in the plant, 4 in all. On a ship with this many souls, 4 is a number that simultaneously feels like mercy and an insult to the idea of mercy. Men sit with it. They put it in their pockets and promise not to lose it. Towlines are strange creatures. They look like leashes, but they are umbilicals. They carry obligation both directions. The merchant's captain reads the sea and reads the submarine and makes choices about angles and engine revolutions and exactly how much sympathy the rope should be allowed. A tow is a kind of conversation. This one speaks in cautious syllables: easy, ease, hold, easy. The ocean replies in its native language: swell, set, yaw. You can breathe on the bridge again. You can even smile once, the way people smile at a joke that isn't funny but suggests future jokes might be possible again. You can walk the length of the control room and not feel like you are measuring a coffin. You can look at your own hands and accept that they are yours and that they did their work. But a submarine is not a patient that either lives or dies on command. It is a complicated, resentful, mechanical city, and when you ask it to survive damage, it has to rearrange treaties made between all its systems. Some treaties hold. Some fail in new ways. Through the afternoon and into the small hours, K219 sulks her way west. The Atlantic flexes. The wounded tube remains sealed, an evil jar no one will open. The reactor sits in a quiet that only looks easy from far away. Residual heat chooses to be manageable. It is an act of generosity engineers pretend is theirs when, in truth, it's physics deciding not to be a villain twice. The crew sleeps in slices, and the slices are thin. Dreaming doesn't work when your nose remembers the acid bite of oxidizer, and your ears remember the thump that turned a routine day into a chapter. Men wake thinking there is another alarm. There is not. Men wake thinking they must go tighten something. They already did. Ships appear at the edge of vision that do not introduce themselves. A gray shape with angles that like to be anonymous. A low wake that writes in cursive rather than block letters. The Cold War is not a movie, but some days the extras are obvious. The submarine on the surface does not care. You care about the bread in the galley, the pressure in the hydraulics, the fatigue in the men, and the question of whether rope will remain a friend when night decides to have opinions. The next day, the sea decides to be a little more the sea. Swell builds. Tow takes strain. Slack would be worse. In the damaged sections, where seals have made peace with their own failure and frames have been urged out of their factory shapes by stress, the flexing adds new disagreement. Bulkheads complain in creaks that you can feel between your molars. A pipeline that no one wants to think about starts to sweat in an unfriendly way. The captain judges reality. You can keep the shell on the water for hours. You can keep men on the shell for hours. You cannot keep both with certainty if the shell decides to sink on its own schedule. He orders the crew to prepare for transfer. It is not surrender. It is the geometry of kindness to the living. A Soviet ship comes close enough to be a neighbor. Sailors peer across gaps with the solemnity of men on balconies during a family emergency. Lines are thrown and caught. Ladders come up from decks that smell of salt and deck paint, and engines that are happy to breathe open air. The long black deck of K219 becomes a place of order as men move in file with sea bags that carry less than the person carrying them is worth. Each footfall is a contract. Step here, then there, then down, then across. Do not fall. Do not let your mind get fancier than your feet. Names are called. Counts are made. Hands cross empty spaces and become bridges. A petty officer who will crack a joke about anything on any Tuesday says nothing at all this time. He stares at a seam in the sea and only steps when he is told. That is how you move 100+ lives one body at a time from a ship that remembers too much to a ship that promises to forget nothing. A handful stay. You have to. A captain does not walk off while his hull still floats, however grudgingly. Engineers don't leave until their panels have been told to sleep, even when the panels have already yawned. A few damage control men refuse to pretend their tools are just metal. They remain, with lines around their mouths that were not there 2 days ago. The tow holds. The sea debates. K219 rides lower than you want any boat to ride. She has earned a rest and does not want to take it while watched. The wake grows uncertain. The bow rises, drops, rises again in a rhythm that suggests someone counting toward goodbye. Inside the hull, behind shut doors and hatches marked with paint that will never dry again, water conducts its own survey. It finds new edges. It makes old edges round. It sorts what to keep and what to rearrange. Steel dimpled by explosion is steel ready to hand audience over to gravity. There is a moment on every ship in trouble when the ship tells you her decision before she acts on it. Old sailors will tell you they can feel it in the soles of their feet. The captain feels it. He scans the horizon and finds no promises there, only weather. He looks at his remaining men and finds the only promise you ever get. They will do what you ask because you asked it right, the order goes. The last men cross, the captain comes last. His boots leave a deck he has lived on like a house for months. He thinks one sentence private and brutal. I would like to come back tomorrow and call this a misunderstanding. He knows he won't. Towline or not, escort or not, sometimes the sea wants the shape it had yesterday. K219 settles. Air leaves spaces and does not return. The bow noses down a few degrees and then a few more. The stern lingers like a hand reluctant to let go of a friend's sleeve at a train platform. Then the angle becomes language. The nose points not at a harbor but at a depth line on a chart that says more than any paragraph. Every eye is on her. The men on the rescue ships hold their rails. The gray shape at distance lists a little closer, as if curiosity had outranked stealth for a second. Water climbs the hull in a soft, terrible crawl. The ocean shows its one consistent courtesy. It makes endings quiet when people have done all they can. K219 goes down in a long, smooth sentence. No theatrics, no last gesture, no movie flourish. Just the slow removal of a thing from the world's surface. The Atlantic takes her back and closes the door as if embarrassed to have left it open this long. There is no cheer. There is no speech. There is only the sound ships make when they idle near grief. Low, respectful. A note that says we will wait until the water is done speaking. Then the tow line floats on the surface like an idea that never learned to swim. Someone hauls it in, hand over hand, a motion older than navies. The crew on the rescue ships gets busy in the way people must after an event that can't be negotiated. Blankets, tea, dry socks. The small reparations we pay to bodies when souls are still calculating. A man laughs too loudly at nothing and apologizes to no one. Another man stares at a knot in the deck plank like it contains a secret answer to a different day. Someone finds a quiet corner and writes a letter with phrases that cannot be sent yet and may never be. A letter that asks a mother to understand a sea she will never meet. The official words will arrive later. They will carry blame because institutions are fluent in blame. The captain will have a long, ungenerous conversation with people who never smelled that chemical bite in the air and never learned a hatch's humor the hard way. He will carry what captains carry, the weight of command and the ticket you buy when you accept it. Every choice yours, every outcome yours, every criticism yours. Years later, some of those words will be softened. Some will stick. History is as stubborn as hatches. Elsewhere, other words accumulate. In one language, the word hero attaches itself to a seaman's surname and refuses to leave. It shows up on plaques and in schoolrooms, and in the stories older men tell a little slower than usual. Sergei Preminin's name learns how to live in the mouths of strangers, who will never carry a pipe wrench into a room where metal tastes like punishment. His mother receives visitors who speak softly and bring flowers and try not to be a spectacle. The plant where he trained dedicates a corner. The Navy that owned him admits that, briefly, he owned it. Teams in clean offices take the incident apart with tweezers made a policy. They adjust a checklist here, a gasket there, a training phrase, a tolerance, a doctrine about when to surface, a protocol about who can call for help how loudly. They move a decimal. They move an attitude. They are not villains. They are doing the human work of bargaining with luck. If we do this, perhaps luck will be kinder next time. Luck does not bargain, but people must try. Across the ocean, other teams read their own memos. A submarine went down. A patrol route went quiet. A satellite captured a shape disappearing. Intelligence officers slide folders across tables with the care you give to puzzles you know are missing pieces. Did we bump them? Did they bump us? Did the sea decide to be the sea? The honest answer, no one knows, does not earn promotions. So there are theories. There are counter-theories. There are men whose job is to believe one, and men whose job is to believe the opposite. They meet at conferences and exchange coffee and pretend respect when they can, because coffee and pretense are the only affordable luxuries in their business. At the edge of Bermuda's map, fishermen talk about the morning they saw black paint where black paint doesn't belong. A weather station logs a pressure wobble that was probably nothing, and surely was something to someone. Birds circle a patch of ocean long after it is obvious there will be no bread from it. The sea heals itself the way it always does, by being too big for our stains to last very long. Back home, lockers are emptied. Sea bags that made the crossing full come back light or not at all. A bunk is reissued. The man who gets it does not ask where the scratch on the frame came from. He covers it with a folded blanket, because that is how sailors apologize to ghosts without the drama of candles. A division of young men stand in formation while a senior officer with the right number of stripes says the right words about duty, quick thinking, the chain of command, the chain of care. Metals click in velvet, like small doors opening and closing. Eyes look straight ahead and also somewhere else. Toward a deck that is no longer a deck, toward a hatch that is now a circle in the mind. There is an unglamorous miracle to enumerate, and we should enumerate it because we demand so much from men and then forget to pay them the compliment of arithmetic. A Soviet ballistic missile submarine suffered a catastrophic casualty in the middle of the ocean. It surfaced, it fought fire, it calmed a reactor, it took a tow. It evacuated almost all its crew without adding them to a list that would break even more mothers. It slipped under in a long, plain curve and did not take the Atlantic coast with it. If you ever meet a sailor who served on any submarine, any navy, any year, and you wonder why his humor is dark and his hands have that way of reaching for a rail in a room that doesn't need one, tell him this story, and you'll watch him nod at the exact places where the world could have ended and did not. That nod is a password. It means we know our luck is not a strategy, and we will keep building strategies anyway. Years later, a research vessel will sweep a sonar fan over that patch of Atlantic and find a shape that does not belong to nature, lying in a depth where sound takes its time to come home. Cameras, if they go, will show angles softened by salt. A tube cap will look like a crooked tooth in a skull with 16 empty sockets. The sea will have converted anger into geology. The screen in the lab will glow. Someone will write a label on a hard drive, K219. Someone will close the case. That too is a ceremony. The families will have pictures in frames that try to make time behave. The boy in the uniform with a shy smile will stay 20 forever in that glass. Mothers will adapt their homes so that a corner contains a sacred geometry of flowers, a candle, and a cap. Fathers will talk about him by describing his walk, because describing the last minutes is not possible in a kitchen where the kettle is boiling. Brothers will teach their children to fix small things without swearing, because that is how you honor a man who fixed the biggest thing without speech. The Navy will write his name in gold on a board that smells like polish and dust and a decade of hands. Some will ask whether any of this was necessary. The Cold War, with its lanes and lines and patrol boxes and silent agreements about risk, sent 100 submarines out to balance each other's existence. Was the balance worth the names we put on plaques? That is the kind of question that cannot be answered at the temperature of politics. It can only be answered at the temperature of a reactor that stayed tame because a person decided to make it so. Captain Britanoff will carry the day like a stone in his pocket. He will be praised and scolded in equal measure, depending on the room. He will bear it because he is a captain, and captains know that rooms are not the sea. He will look at his hands and see the inside of a hatch. He will sleep and wake to the sound of a pressure wave that only he hears. He will make peace, eventually, with his own sentence. I did what was possible in the direction of mercy. That sentence is the only medal worth keeping. And for the men who stepped across a line of rope from one deck to another, the world will have small continuations. Pay, leave. A train ride home where the conductor doesn't know he is taking a Miracle North in a third-class seat. Shoes on a doormat. A spoon in a kitchen drawer. A shoulder under a sleeping child. Laughter at a joke with no edge to it. The body remembers until it doesn't. The mind remembers until it does. Suddenly, at the smell of hot water on metal, at a traffic light turning red too slowly, at a hammer hitting a nail too hard. Somewhere, a class of new sailors hears this briefed as a case study. Tube breach, oxidizer reaction, fire, scram, manual insertion, casualty count, evacuation, sink. They take notes. They draw diagrams. They practice with fake wheels in a room that hates drama. They stand in front of a brass hatch and make their forearms learn a piece of ancient wisdom. Stubborn things yield if you ask them with the right mixture of leverage and respect. They learn a name and a date and a position on a map, and they do not know yet that names can become private prayers. If you need an ending, this is the one we can afford. A submarine went out to make a line on a map mean something. The line held, but not because of a line. It held because men refused to let a bad minute recruit a catastrophe. It held because a young man put his hands on a wheel and turned it until the wheel agreed. It held because a captain found the middle between pride and panic. It held because sailors kept passing each other wrenches, cups, lines, and steadiness. The sea still keeps K219. On fair days, it draws a skin of light over the place where she went down and makes it look like nothing has ever happened there. On rough days, it reminds everyone that all ships are guests. At dawn, a different submarine somewhere else rolls slightly to the right, then to the left, the way sleeping things adjust. A watch officer sips coffee that tastes like coins and boredom. He looks at a panel that is gloriously, insultingly normal. He does not know the names of the men who bought that normal for him with heat and steel and a hatch. Not all of them. He knows one. He thinks it without ceremony. Then he looks at his watch and calls the next drill. We like grand finales. The ocean prefers quiet ones. K219 vanished into the page without an exclamation point, and that is how most of our biggest rescues happen. A decision, a turn, a latch, a count, a rope, a step, a name said aloud in a corridor, a logbook closed by a steady hand. How much courage fits in a human chest? Exactly as much as you need. At the exact minute you cannot borrow any. Enough to make a machine remember its manners. Enough to place an entire coastline back into its afternoon. Enough to turn 4 funerals into the only funerals that had to be. If you are the kind of person who needs rituals, here is one. The next time you walk past a door that sticks, put your shoulder against it and push it open for the person behind you. Do it quietly, do it all the way, step through last. That is the whole story, reduced to something a day can hold. The Atlantic has forgotten the details, people have not. That is our bargain with the sea. It erases, we remember. Somewhere, a plaque with a young man's name is shiny at the edge, where a thumb has rubbed it every time a sailor has passed. Somewhere, a captain sits by a window and watches the wind comb a field and lets his lungs measure the distance between then and now. Somewhere, in a classroom, a hatch wheel is turned by hands that have no scars yet, and an instructor says, again, until boredom becomes survival muscle. And somewhere else, the best somewhere, life goes on in the exact way this story earned. A kettle drum of rain on a roof. A bus running late for no good reason. A dog asleep under a chair. Shoes by a door. A child calling from another room, "Come look!" Ordinary. As ordinary as possible, on a day nobody will commemorate, because the world stayed exactly itself.